Every minority group in the country has been caricatured. There have been 2- and 3-dimensional objects which mock and defame them. But no group has been caricatured as often or in as many ways as African Americans. People come into the museum and they're really surprised to see authentic pieces. I think 2 of the best teaching tools are stories and authentic objects. And when you can combine those, I think you can pierce what is often a shield that people use against learning about something. My name is David Pilgrim. I am Vice President for Diversity, Inclusion, and Strategic Initiatives at Ferris State University. I'm also the founder and director of the Jim Crow Museum. The Jim Crow Museum is the nation's largest publicly accessible collection of racist objects. We are an anti-racism facility that uses objects of intolerance to teach tolerance and promote social justice. Most people that come into the museum don't know what Jim Crow is. It's really the whole system, the racial hierarchy that had whites at the top and blacks at the bottom. And the objects that we have in the museum are the evidence of that hierarchy. I believe there's a power in the actual objects. You can show a photograph of a segregation sign, but it's more powerful to show the segregation sign. It's kind of weird, but I spent much of my childhood and early adulthood traveling to, flea markets and auction houses and people's homes looking for these objects. I grew up in Alabama, Mobile, and Pritchard, Alabama, at the end of the Jim Crow period. I was always fascinated with race and bought my first piece when I was 11 or 12. But in those days, these objects were everywhere, including in the homes of African Americans. I had a small and growing collection. Went to a historically black college, Jarvis Christian College, which is in Hawkins, Texas. And it was there that I understood from my teachers that you could use objects to teach. And so these became teaching tools for me. And I didn't have the expectation that I would create a museum. Quite frankly, I didn't know what I would do with my collection. I taught American minorities and race relations, and so I would use the objects as teaching tools, but my collection was growing, and I thought, well, I need a physical location to be. And so they gave me this tiny room. It was only 500 square feet. And, I would bring my students in there instead of me bringing an object to class every day. And eventually, other teachers started, bringing their students in there. And it took another more than a decade to move into a museum proper, which we did in 2012. The collection that I donated to the institution, which served as sort of the founding or base collection, was probably about, something just over 3,000 pieces. Our focus is really on everyday objects that you would have found in someone's home. Objects that mocked and belittled African Americans. Objects like cookie jars and toys and games and sheet music. Any everyday object you think of. The museum, by the way, also has objects that show African Americans pushing back. And so we have pieces from artists, African American artists who deconstruct racist imagery. We have a small civil rights section. We also have a section on African American achievement, because African Americans were not simply victims of Jim Crow, but did push back and eventually were central to dismantling Jim Crow in this country. We have a lynching tree because over 4,000 African Americans were lynched during the Jim Crow period. We have a showcase which deals with the Klan. One of the sections in the museum where we have our best discussions is a recreated kitchen where you have Aunt Jemima and other commercialized mammy images. I think we have great conversations there because some people look at that and they think, there's nothing wrong with this. This is not offensive. It certainly doesn't offend me. It's actually, in a nostalgic way, very pleasant because it makes me think of good times spent with my family. But others, like myself, see it as the remnants and the residue of enslavement and Jim Crow segregation. You know, it struck me a while back when just in the museum by myself, standing in front of a lynching tree and all these horrible caricatured objects, that the museum is really a testimony to the resiliency of African American people. The Jim Crow period itself went from the 1870s to the 1960s, but we didn't limit the collection to that, and I'm glad we didn't. I'm glad, for example, that we have some contemporary objects because they show that the attitudes, tastes, and values of the Jim Crow period morphed into the present sometimes. We've always had racial justice movements. This most recent iteration, sparked by the brutal murder of George Floyd and others, has caused all Americans, not just corporations and police departments, but all of us to ask ourselves the question of what role does racism play in our culture? We saw that in the museum, and we were a part of the national dialogue asking that question and other questions in terms of where we need to go forward. I want for the future what I've always wanted, and that is to create a space where people have intelligent discussions about race relations, and racism. And that's as good a legacy as any in a nation where people still struggle to talk about those things. We're in the early stages of raising money to build a 2-story standalone, state-of-the-art facility. We're doing great work now, but we're going to do greater work when it's built. I think we have created a top-flight objective documentation of our nation's past, and that we're helping to create a path forward.